Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Natalie Sandoval, and I'm the Executive Director for ULI San Francisco. And I'm super excited for today's program, which is a lead-up event for one of our flagship initiatives, Housing the Bay. So before we kick off the program, I would like to thank our Housing the Bay sponsors who help really support this work through their commitment. And we're excited to have Catalyst Housing Group as a premier sponsor this year and Ruben Junius Rose as our reception sponsor. Our summit supporters include Hanson Bridget, Methuen, the Northern California Carpenters Regional Council, and Page Sutherland Page. If your company is interested in all of the benefits that come with committing to Housing the Bay and joining this group of sponsors, please reach out to me. Anytime. There are a lot of great benefits and free tickets to lead up programs like this one, as well as the summit on June 9th. And we also have another lead up event scheduled for Housing the Bay in May. It'll be a behind the scenes tour of 5M in San Francisco, which will probably sell out. So please sign up for sponsorship today if you want to access to that event. And if you're not yet a member of ULI, I hope you consider becoming one so you can take advantage of the many benefits we have to offer, from access to a wide network of industry leaders, to research reports, to members-only events and webinars. And next slide. And most importantly, it's our members who really lead and create our programming through volunteering. For example, today's event was put together by members of our Housing the Bay Steering Committee, Robert Ogilvie and Nikki Beasley in particular. Thank you very much for helping us put this program on. And if you're interested in getting more involved with ULI San Francisco, please don't hesitate to reach out to me to learn more. So today I'm really excited for this Housing the Bay webinar, which builds on a session we actually had in last year's summit on pathways to home ownership. So this is the 5th year that ULI San Francisco has been working together with members to tackle the housing crisis and develop new solutions and insights into how we can create more housing and opportunities for people at all income levels. This year, we're super excited to be convening again in person for our 5th summit on June 9th at the Hyatt in San Francisco. Our theme is scale and momentum, with a focus on how we can really make an impact and move the needle. I really hope you can join us. And just a small detail that early bird pricing has been extended for 1 more week. So get on those discounted tickets now. So before we start, just a few housekeeping reminders. This session is being recorded, so you will be muted throughout the session. Closed captioning is available. We'll be using the Q&A function to submit your questions. So use the like button to upvote questions that you want to be sure are answered. And then be sure to take this conversation online. We're on Twitter at ULI San Francisco. So now on to today's program. We've got a great lineup of panelists, and to kick us off, I'll pass the virtual mic to Nikki Beasley, who is the Executive Director at Richmond Neighborhood Housing Services. Nikki, off to you.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, ULI San Francisco, for being diligent to keep the ownership conversation going. We really appreciate the opportunity and excited to be a part of this panel. So for those that do not know our work, Richmond Neighborhood Housing Services is an affordable housing organization that really looks at housing through many different lenses, but one of our focal points is home ownership as a HUD counseling agency, and we focus a lot of our time and attention in infill and small site development. I'm excited to share the panel with these incredible out-of-the-box thinkers throughout the country that are thinking through plausible solutions to address the needs of housing for all. We have Nikki Merkson out of Brooklyn, New York, the founder of Pear Gap. We have Julia Stevenson from Washington, D.C., who is with LISC and acts as the originator for LISC Strategic Investments and managing their impact fund. And then we have Howard Smith from St. Louis, Missouri, principal at Smith New Markets Tax Credit Associates, LLC. As I said, they all have practical solutions on how to solve the housing needs and crisis throughout the country, which I'm confident we'll have some takeaways that we can benefit from here in the Bay Area. Today, we're talking about innovation, and I'm really sensitive about that word innovation, and I want to keep it sacred because I want to ensure that the word does not become, a known tagline in housing, because innovation is required if us as housing practitioners and community really want to see the changes that we are all talking about, we want to see. And that is to have thriving, vibrant communities. We as housing professionals must come to terms with the fact that this is more than just units. This is really about people. And housing needs to be about the people and addressing all the needs of housing as our communities are demonstrating. Everyone has dynamic needs as it relates to their shelter. And we've assembled a panel today that has a national perspective, working towards solutions to bring new ideas, resources, and access to this housing conversation. And we're specific to home ownership because, again, just until recently has home ownership even been a part of a housing discussion. So I would like to kick off this conversation with Nikki Merkson out of Brooklyn, Pear Gap. So Nikki, it is not often we get an opportunity to talk about technology and how it can influence housing. So I would like you to open up the conversation of what is your work with Pear Gap and why is Pear Gap a critical conversation we should be having as we're looking through housing solutions?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nikki and the Urban Land Institute, for allowing me to share my perspective on housing as we see it today across the nation. After spending over 2 decades in the mortgage banking industry and community development space, 2 major issues stood out for me. One is homeownership was becoming more and more unattainable for not only low to moderate income earners, which in community development, that's what I focused on. It was becoming impossible for middle income earners. And 2, the traditional way of thinking when it comes to home ownership has changed or has to change to fit the behaviors of today's society. And that we need to reimagine it, not as only a vehicle to secure housing, but as an investment opportunity and a pathway to building generational wealth. We as people of color, we as middle-class income earners who pay or who live paycheck to paycheck, even though we're making 6-figure salaries, and we as the millennial generation who are having a hard time qualifying for traditional mortgage loans. Over the span of my banking career, I was able to see firsthand the barriers of ownership and a lack of financial education in underserved communities, while working with community stakeholders in urban cities across the Northeast to provide education to underserved communities. I found that the millennial population, specifically middle income people of color who made decent salaries, were still facing challenges when qualifying for mortgage loans due to high student loan debt and increase of property values and change in neighborhoods. And they were being priced out of their neighborhoods. And I wanted to solve an old problem using an entirely different strategy. In 2017, I resigned from banking to launch a real estate co-investing platform called Pear Gap. And Pear Gap is a technology company where we match qualified co-buyers to purchase homes together, making home ownership possible for more people. We help future homeowners overcome some of the barriers and common financial obstacles that they usually face when it comes to home ownership through co-ownership. The reason why I felt compelled to resign from an amazing banking career was because I could. A career in banking taught me financial education, and home ownership actually changed the trajectory of my life. And I was able to solve my own housing issues coming from a family of generational renters and being displaced as a teenager. I made smart investment choices when choosing the right locations of my homes, and I learned how to leverage them, which started me on my path to building generational wealth for my 2 children. I faced many challenges as a homeowner and a real estate investor over the years, but I quickly learned that nothing worth something is easy. Homeownership today is impossible for an entire generation of Americans, and Pair Gap is lowering the barrier for a new class of investors using a shared ownership model to purchase real estate. And we believe that shared ownership increases individual buying power and makes homeownership affordable for those who can't qualify on their own. Our solution is not at all complicated because renters have been living together for years as roommates. So at Pair Gap, we match, facilitate, and de-risk the investment for co-buyers and deliver opportunities for fractional ownership through a trusted process. Our platform creates a digital home buying customer experience that simplifies the process and provides transparency from start to finish. Buyers are matched to one another based on an alignment of shared buying power against their financial goals, neighborhood preferences, and living needs. And buyers can also co-own with family, friends, partners, and members of our network and platform. Our co-owners are matched, and when they're matched, we developed a co-buying and asset protection agreement to secure the buyers. I like to call these real estate prenups. Which is super important when going into a co-investing transaction. And once the co-buyers start their investment portfolio, we coach them on how to leverage equity to achieve their desired outcomes and cash flow. My second point was Pair Gap also coaches buyers on how to make smart investment choices. We are far from the traditional nuclear family days, and quite frankly, young adults are not following traditional norms like their parents. There's more single households across America, with millennials delaying marriage and starting their families later. And also social behaviors have changed when it comes to investing, and individuals make financial decisions based on information received via social interaction. So the American dream and owning a home is still there for some, but has shifted because requirements don't meet the needs of today's consumers. A perfect example of social behavior change when it comes to investing is what Robinhood did to change investing, which has now created a new source of wealth for young investors. So technology innovation is changing the way we live, play, and work, and young people today are more likely to make choices regarding where they live and work based on lifestyle and happiness over wealth accumulation and property ownership, and that needs to change. However, these technology changes really gives us more access to information, and Pair Gap has taken advantage of this access to gather a host of new variables that make it possible to paint a more vivid picture of a location's future risks and opportunities. We've created personalized reports for co-investors to help them strategize ways to drive better real estate investment decisions. And staying in our neighborhoods and being part of change will help families gain access and have potential to grow over time, being informed about what's going on and the plans for their neighborhood. And it will encourage people to stay and invest in their neighborhoods. If you haven't noticed, the future of our cities are changing, and this is probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for families to make generational impacts that can potentially affect multiple generations. So these Pair Gap reports are really there to educate buyers, to inform them about what's going on in their neighborhoods, and to help them make good investment choices and be part of these changing cities across the country. My last point is that the greatest wealth transfer in modern history has begun. Baby boomers and older Americans have spent decades accumulating enormous amounts of money. And at the end of this year, last year, first quarter, Americans aged 70 and above had a net worth of nearly 35 trillion, according to the Federal Reserve data. And over the past 25 years, an estimated 68 trillion will be transferred from US households to their heirs. And Black Americans' median wealth is less than 15% of that of white families in the US, and Black Americans have less to pass down in general. So the point is that the median Black household wealth is forecasted to hit zero by 2053. And we need to really start to make these changes and look to see how we can close this wealth gap and solve this housing crisis quickly because we're running out of time. And the Pair Gap reports were created to address this problem in particular. So I'll stop there and I'll let the next person speak because I can go on and on.
Well, thank you, Nikki, and I appreciate you starting this conversation because from our work, it's all about the people. And oftentimes as practitioners, we think we're solving without ever really understanding the needs of the people. Right. And, also from our perspective, we speak a lot on educating people, but not to your point of making prudent, wise decisions around the right investment so that they really can capitalize on closing that wealth gap. So really appreciate the work you're doing with Pair Gap and could definitely see this being transformed through many communities throughout the United States. So I appreciate the work that you're doing. And so now I want to hand it over to Julia Stevenson. So we've talked about providing tools and resources for the homeowner, because it's one thing to have access to the capital, but how can you best invest? But now we're going to talk to Julia Stevenson with her work and role with LISC, making a real bold statement about their impact fund and how they're getting funds to Black developers and being focused and targeted on communities of color. So Julia, share a little bit about your work and why has LISC in this investment model taken a stand for the work that you're doing?
Yes, thank you, Nikki. First, thank you all for having me. It's so good to be here, especially on Urban Land Institute's platform, very integral player in real estate development. So I work for LISC Strategic Investments, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of LISC. LISC is the Local Initiative Support Corporation, the nation's largest CDFI or Community Development Financial Institution. And how do we differentiate? Well, the community development financial institutions are designed to support community development in underserved communities. And traditionally, that's been done through conventional lending and in a special focus on affordable housing. However, the great folks at LISC, which has been around for 40 years or a little over 40 years, wanted to think outside of the box. And in response to a need to be more creative with impactful opportunities, created LISC Strategic Investments as an investment management platform for impact funds. And so we have several funds under our management. Some are place-based and support the local offices. You can go to our website, LISC Strategic Investments. But the funds that I want to mention are one that is managed by the LISC Bay Area. It's the Partnership for the Bay's Future. And that's Bay's Future Fund and our Community Housing Fund. But today we'll be talking mostly about the Black Economic Development Fund, which Nikki alluded to. And I primarily am responsible for deploying that capital. And the Black Economic Development Fund was created in response to corporations trying to figure out what can we do and how can we do more as the United States was going through a racial awakening. I think having a captive audience to watch the murder of George Floyd, followed by other racially charged incidents and other murders of unarmed citizens. I think that instigated a lot of dialogue and corporations wanted to respond. So the Black Economic Development Fund is one manifestation of that response. It's a $250 million private equity fund. We invest in Black communities, Black sponsors, whether they're business or real estate developers, via debt instruments. Now, debt is a commodity, so what do we really have to offer? Well, flexibility in terms of looking at our sponsors holistically, how we look at the deal and the impact, how we define impact. Economic development is not just creating jobs, it's also how do we facilitate wealth creation for our sponsors and for the community. So, with the Black Economic Development Fund, we're able to deploy capital that allows us to support what the market says is needed. And going back to your point earlier about us not dictating what's needed in our communities, we're able to be very creative with the types of deals we look at, and still, with honoring our fiduciary duty, underwrite the risk appropriately and also price appropriately. But really, we're oriented to figure out how can we get these deals done.
Thank you for that, Julia. So really enjoy the pathway of this conversation, because what we also understand, on one side, you have the consumer who needs access that has, due to systematic limitations, have not had access, the homeowner, and providing them some tangible tools to make prudent decisions on making the largest investment they will tend to make in their life. And now we're talking about providing resources and tools to Black developers, and being very bold, not saying BIPOC, but Black developers who typically have a vested interest in the communities, because many of them have lived in those communities, have family members, and really are instrumental in wanting to make the change, but tend to also have some of those systematic challenges, which we find even in our work, in the work that we're doing with our emerging developers program. You can't get the capital because you don't have the experience, can't get the experience until you get the project. So that you guys are being fundamentally purposed to figure out how to make it work with mitigating and managing risk. So I appreciate that. So now we're going to bring Howard Smith to the conversation, which is going to speak to something that we all know as developers, New Markets Tax Credit, a well-known tool that has been in the industry for a number of years. And this is really that topic of innovation, how Howard and his team have figured out how to leverage a tool to bring home ownership that's affordable to the market. So Howard, please talk about your work and how you have transformed how New Markets Tax Credits are being used to stabilize housing.
Thank you, Nikki, and thanks ULI for the opportunity to speak to your members. We really appreciate it. We've been in business for 14 years now, using New Markets Tax Credits to fund for sale affordable housing. And the comment that we get the most, and we get it every week, is I didn't know you could use New Markets for housing. And in fact, you can. So I just wanted to give you an idea of how much we do. And I brought one of our builds maps. Last month, we closed our last transaction, and it brought us up to 499 million in transactions that we have done solely for New Markets Tax Credits used to develop for sale affordable housing. And you can see that the homes financed are climbing over 4,300, but that doesn't include the additional homes that were made possible and which had to be built during the compliance period. So it's more than that. But when we started putting this together, as Nikki said, I'm in St. Louis, and one of the reasons why we got into business here is that U.S. Bank's Community Development Corporation is located here, and they through our joint participation in our local Habitat for Humanity affiliate, we had conversations about how this could be the first for sale affordable housing tax credit in the country. So what we did is on the back of a napkin, sketched out a concept, went down to the mothership Habitat, pitched the idea to them. And long story short, our first allocation that we received was 25 million in New Markets tax credits that were used to fund Habitat for Humanity affiliates in the GO zone right after Katrina hit. So that was in 2008, and we did a lot of Habitat for Humanities all over the country, but we then widened the model to include a more typical business model of a not-for-profit for sale affordable developer. And we now work with CDEs, which are the entities that compete to receive allocation from the CDFI fund division of the Department of Treasury. And each one of those CDEs uses the allocation that they are awarded competitively just to fund for sale affordable housing. The two that we've received allocations for, aside from Habitat for Humanity, who now manages their own CDE, is Housing Partnership Network and the financing arm of NeighborWorks America, Community Housing Capital. And so I thought that it would make sense to just show you the last transaction we closed. And this was Community Housing Capital received a total award of 30 million. And what our company likes to do is to deploy it all at once if we can. And the reason is because when we aggregate the recipients of these funds, and we call the recipients or the New Markets borrower a Qualic B, we're able to push more net benefit down to the bottom line. That the program was put in place to incentivize conventional investment in our underserved communities using the sale proceeds from tax credits as the driver of that conventional investment. So there's two sides to the capital stack. There are the sale proceeds of the tax credits. And again, we work with US Bank, primarily the great partner, very dedicated and committed to the program. And then in this particular example, the tax credit equity, the 8,892,000, which you can see above, right below numeral 3 in the at the top of the page. It's complemented by the conventional investment under number 2, which is 21 million and additional dollars. And together that equals a $30 million transaction. Just to take you at a high level and how this works is we refer to the investments fund as the pot where the stew is cooked. And there's two main ingredients. One is the tax credit equity that we just went over, 8.8 million, and the other is that conventional investment that we're driving into to the underserved communities, and that's going to amount to 21,174,000. And there's 3 ways, though, don't be daunted by that number, because there's 3 ways to accumulate that conventional investment that has to be paired with the equity that the bank is providing. And the best way is to accumulate costs that have been expended in the past 36 months. And we are able to monetize those costs and reduce the amount of cash that has to be brought to the transaction. This model only works with not-for-profit Qualic Bs, but that doesn't mean that the Qualic B cannot hire a for-profit contractor or subdeveloper for any market. And that's routinely done. So in this case, all 5 are NeighborWorks America members, and each of them contributed in their portion of the amount that it would take to trigger the effectiveness of the receipt of this almost $9 million in tax credit equity from US Bank that they will not get back. So at the end of the compliance period, this goes on for 7 years, the portions of the loan consisting of the 8,892,000 will be forgiven. And this is 10 minutes is a short amount of time to present a complex transaction like this. But what happens and why this is different, and before I go, I want to talk about the secret sauce, which is not secret. And it is totally open to anybody who wants to do this. All of the technology that we've developed and our professionals have developed as a team is open to anybody. There's no proprietary, we don't have any proprietary ownership of any of this. We want for sale affordable housing just to be built. So if what you'll see here in the leveraged lender box in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see that Avenue, or let's look at Dayton's Bluff. They were the largest one. They took 23% of this allocation. They had to come to the closing table with almost $5 million. But they had 2.5 million in pre-incurred costs that we were able to capture and monetize. So as a result, they're coming to the closing table with 2.6 million. And then if you go down to the bottom of this diagram and you look at this green box, you'll see the net benefit. That's their all-in money. They don't have to come out of pocket for anything over the compliance period, which is 7 years, is 1,445,937. So their transaction was coming to the closing table with 2.6 million because we're able to monetize those other costs that they've expended in the past 36 months. And they're able to leave with 2.6 million plus the 1,445,000. They have to spend those funds on housing within 12 to 18 months. Do they have to sell the houses? No, they don't. Obviously, they're going to have to pay back a source lender, which is provides them the funds that they have to bring to the closing table. But we have found through all of our transactions that for sale affordable housing inventory is so low that these houses don't stay on the market for long. And in the last minute I have, I'll tell you about a site visit I did in Indianapolis where INHP, a HPN member, employed 4 sub-developers and sub-markets around Indianapolis where housing had not been built in 30 years. But that doesn't mean people hadn't lived there. And as soon as the houses were built, they didn't even have to market them. They were snatched up. People wanted to move back to where they grew up, where they felt the most comfortable, and to start generating that intergenerational wealth. So I think I'll leave it there for right now. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Howard. And I am happy to say we meaning RNHS is very excited to be bringing this concept to the Bay Area. And the reason that this strategy is so incredibly important, as we're having the arching conversation around equity, wealth building, how can we support disadvantaged communities? Many of those communities have blight, dormancy, dilapidated homes, and there are no resources. And we learned the hard way as we wanted to address the affordable housing need for ownership through the ability to provide inventory. And as many of you know, that if it is not over 10 units, if it's not rental, funds become very sparse. And then when you start looking at area median incomes over 80 to 120, then the dollars actually become invisible. But it does not mean that those projects are not just as valuable, because if we think about it, the time that it would take to build 3, 5, 10 units is a lot shorter period of time than building 100 to 200 units. And the way in which a new homeowner can come in there now, be invested in the community, to what Nikki has mentioned, to what Julia has mentioned, can transform a community overnight. So we're really excited about Howard and his team helping us with our Filbert project that is in West Oakland, that really ran into a standstill. We didn't know how to do it, but we're really hoping that this innovative idea can assist us. So I would like to bring the panel back. So if Nikki and Julia can come back on our virtual Zoom panel. And now this is a great opportunity to now get your questions answered about some of the things that you've heard. So if you have not had the chance to put your question in Q&A, please do. And this is now an opportunity to have a discussion. So either Natalie or Pooja, do you want to help with the questions? And I do see one for Pair Gap. So the one question, so I have it. So the one question is, how does Pair Gap solution solve the lack of housing for people to live in?
The lack of housing for people to live in.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, Pair Gap solves it because, just having access to purchase the property is becoming a problem. So that buying power is extremely important as these neighborhoods and as property values go up and as rates go up. And, you know, being in the mortgage industry for so long, you know, there's a specific criteria that's needed in order to qualify. And some people lack all of them and some people lack some of them, right? And it's an opportunity for people to kind of collaborate. And, you know, with collaboration, you can actually have something or reach your goals quicker than you can doing by yourself. And I think that's the world we're in now, is really being able to share resources so that we can get what we just basic need, right? Housing. So Pair Gap is doing just that. You know, we're finding people who have like goals and matching them and pairing them together and then walking them through this co-investing process so that people feel more comfortable. This home ownership process begins to be more understandable and digestible. And then you can actually invest in neighborhoods that you actually want to live in and not the ones that you can just afford to live in.
And I think that is a proven statement from Howard. The community that you mentioned about when the homes were built, people actually wanted to come back to where they felt most comfortable in living. So it's tried and true. And also what I'm hearing from you, Nikki, is that with the high cost area and you being in Brooklyn, and I think Oakland has been considered, you know, another Brooklyn.
Yeah, we're neck and neck.
So there has to be some innovative ideas of how, you know, if you're going to pay the same amount for rent that you could a mortgage, and you have to figure out how you can possibly leverage some of those benefits of being an owner versus renting. So I think you bring up some good points.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I just want to add that, you know, a room in Brooklyn starts at like 1,300 to 1,500. So imagine if, you know, these roommates get together, everybody is paying the same amount, but everybody has a share of ownership in that building. Yeah. You know, that money won't go to waste anymore or to the landlords.
Yeah, and I think that answers that question. You have now secured housing to where those people will not be at risk of displacement because the owner is looking to do something different with the property. So thanks for lifting that up. Julie, I saw you take yourself off mic. Did you have a comment or something you wanted to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, you know, even though Peer Gap is new to me, Nikki and I were just introduced, you know, a week ago. When I think about impactful dollars and innovative solutions, if there are lenders in the audience, typically we think about multifamily or for sale housing with a certain credit box in mind. But imagine a sponsor coming to us for financing in an underserved community where the market doesn't necessarily prove out the thesis of their strategy for the asset, but they've got a partner like Peer Gap that can clearly identify the path towards out sales and supporting the demographic that's targeted in a way that metric focused people or statistical focused people like myself can receive. Then you can get a little bit more comfortable with understanding how to underwrite that type of opportunity and truly be impactful with dollars that go towards home ownership, which directly goes into wealth creation. So just wanted to offer that.
I appreciate that, Julia, because you're also speaking about, it's more about the storytelling and making those that are investing comfortable that they won't get the money back. Exactly. And sometimes just what's on paper may not tell the whole story, but if you can share a narrative that people can understand the path, and we saw that with Howard's diagram, there are many moving pieces. So Howard, speak to that. As you kind of went on this journey, sharing this new concept, what were some of the challenges of getting the investor to understand how you could implement and it be successful?
You know, it wasn't the investors as much as it's been the other CDEs, who are the entities that compete in order to get tax credits. And for many years, those CDEs thought that the only way you can use the new markets and be successful to get another allocation, which is what the CDEs want, is to create jobs. And building homes doesn't create jobs, but it has its own very important critical outcomes that are, one leg of the healthy stool of a community. So, but the CDFI fund has granted or, awarded allocation to CDEs that only do housing. And that's really helped convince other CDEs that they should consider it. In particular, San Francisco CDE would really like to use their credits for housing. We were working with them on a project that just didn't come to fruition, but they were very serious about it because everybody wants to address the inventory problem and use a tool that it's one of the only tools out there, unfortunately. One of the things, Nikki, I was going to say to Nikki is that I would hope that ADUs also would be, for Pair Gap, an interesting tool to utilize for collaborative investing that also provides, I think, I don't know, I would think that provides more value and comfort when there's two units that you can use. Are you using those in your program?
Absolutely. ADUs are not so popular in New York City. They're more popular outside of the city, but definitely it is, to your point, it's the perfect model to be able to co-invest with somebody. And let me just mention that you don't need a specific product to be able to originate these type of loans. In 2017, there were billions of mortgages originated for non-occupant buyers or non-married co-buyers.
Oh.
And I do want to lift up the ADU conversation. So our organization is the program manager for the Keys to Equity program in Oakland that's supporting Oakland residents with the focus of Black homeowners build ADUs. It's a high touch approach to really validate all these things we've heard about ADUs, but it also speaks to one's ability to leverage their asset in many different ways, whether it is to help with that generational living. You want your mom, your auntie, your grandmother to now be housed with you, but not necessarily in your house, just to, maintain sanity. But at the same time, if you want to leverage it to generate additional income, or for those that have interest in helping the unhoused, but you can't do that if you don't own the asset. So we're, also looking to see, really, can ADUs be a solve to housing, and how can you best leverage land and property so you can, do a dual purpose of supporting housing. So I appreciate you bringing that up. What else is resonating with you all as we've all kind of shared what our lens and direction of housing and our focus in what we do. And Julia, started connecting some dots in regards to how Pair Gap can support. I think Howard has done the same, but what else is resonating with the group based on this conversation today?
I think for me, just that specialization, to the developers in the audience that want to be impactful with their projects. It's important to be able to leverage partners like Pair Gap, like Smith, New Markets Tax Credits. There are deals that I've only looked at because there was a partner with the specialization in what they were trying to do. And why is that? It's not because I'm biased. Well, I mean, everyone has biases, but it's not because of bias. It's because when you're talking to a fund, unlike a bank, we have a few different factors to consider. We have to deploy our dollars. We have to deploy our dollars within a specific time frame, and we have to get out enough of the funds so that, depending on how it's structured, we can recycle those dollars. We can have them outstanding. They can accrue the interest that we've not promised, but that we are targeting for our investors. And so I can't consider the ultra creative, pioneering new idea because I don't think that I can get it through our approval process. But what can I do? I can leverage the expertise where there is a track record we can point to of deals with similar scope that were able to be successfully completed. Now that I can get behind. So it's about making sure that you know your audience, banks versus funds versus community development financial institutions versus private lenders, et cetera. But also important that you stack up your project team. And especially when it comes to sponsors of color and Black sponsors, you can have all of the expertise having worked for some of the largest institutions and well-known developers in the country, go out on your own and be treated like an emerging developer with no experience. So when you're able to stack up your project team, perhaps you have to incur additional costs that you weren't necessarily modeling to, but you get to build that track record. You get to leverage their expertise to get everyone comfortable. You also get to avoid some potholes that they've already encountered and can tell you where they are. So just another way to think about folks like Peer Gap and Smith New Markets tax credits as you try to achieve impactful deals.
Thank you for that, Julia. And talking about audience, this is your time. So please, if you have a question, what's resonating with you, because to many this may be a new concept because it is a different way of approaching housing outside of the traditional number of units and finding value in neighborhood and a lot of other dynamics, taking a holistic approach. So please take this time to talk to some of our experts that we've pulled together today and put it in the Q&A so that you walk away hopefully informed, but maybe using some of these strategies and some of the initiatives that you may be undertaking.
Nikki, I'd also like to, address the first question when they talk about lack of housing. And, real estate has cycles and we're currently in a cycle and it won't last forever. So while, housing is scarce because, the prices, the values are going up and there's a little bit of change in the market right now, it won't last forever. These are strategies that are long-term strategies that we need to work on. So I just wanted to address that. And thank you, Julia, for bringing that up. And, again, there goes collaboration, being able to collaborate with other partners. And I love that list is, looking outside of the box and looking for innovative solutions to solve these old problems.
And go ahead, Julia.
I was going to ask if I could ask a question to the other panelists and you, Nikki. When we were preparing for this discussion, we talked about holistically looking at communities and not just the developments, and how typically on a larger scale, when we talk about affordable housing, the conversation is driven to the unit or the asset itself and not necessarily to the support and the neighborhood amenities. So from the perspective of you all, how do you see the incorporation of developing Main Street, or how do you see yourselves in relation to developments of commercial space in the communities that you serve? Tie that in.
But from our point of view, and I want to save time for Nikki's response as well, but the way it works with our structure is that it really emanates from the not-for-profits who are performing in their markets, and in contrast to thankfully there was a tax credit that was proposed in the Build Back Better bill. Unfortunately, it didn't pass. However, that particular tax credit was going to piggyback onto the structure of LIHTC, which is controlled by the state legislatures. And having worked with the people who are in the community and understand who lives in what house and why to build one house here and not another one there is a different sort of roadmap for community development than I could foresee a state legislature undertaking. And not to be negative, because of course, we want every tool that we can use for affordable housing. But I think that being grounded in the community is the best way to understand what the needs are.
Thank you for that, Howard. And I think I would just add on, our approach is that this is the part and in both. It's not either or. It is critically important that we understand people and their needs and try to solve for that versus what we think people want. And with us being focused in neighborhoods, just understanding when you have city blocks of nothing but open, lots that become dumping grounds, that there's no attraction to bring up vitality. So that's kind of really where our messaging is, just to support the communities that we've been dedicated to serve. So there is, no, go ahead, Howard.
I was going to say that's really the song that LISC sings, because of they do the deep dives in the cities because of those very principles. Is that I'm guessing, Julia, that's the reason?
I would say that's a fair statement. Our parent company, it's great when we get referrals from there, because we really are able to discuss those opportunities, those investment opportunities that we're looking at holistically, and collaborate with what they're doing in terms of the community development, or just understanding the submarket and its needs as a whole.
So a question comes up from, what I would assume our audience is how can developers learn how to use these tools, especially from Julia's, mention of those funds, the funds that you manage, to Howard's New Markets Tax Credit. So if you have a developer out there that this is a new concept, how's the best way for them to learn to leverage some of these things that we've talked about?
We connect up people with successful developers we've worked with and have no problems doing that. And the people we work with are very open about how to use them, and how much resources it's going to take, and how much of a brain drain it is on the organization. So we really encourage people to talk to people who have done it. And 70% of the people who go through it the first time and are it's brain damage, but as soon as it's over, they want to do another one. And we do.
And I do believe in the promotion and marketing of our conversation today. Everyone's contact information has been shared, but I am going to assume that if anyone in the audience would like to have a more direct conversation, that everyone here would be willing to have that dialogue one-on-one.
Sure.
Absolutely. I would just ask that if it's via LinkedIn, please put a note, so that I understand which avenue we are being acquainted. But to that point, I would say my response to your question, Nikki, is expanding the relationships. Networking is not working is something that I believe in, that motto. I think that establishing relationships, especially when it comes to sponsors of color or minority sponsors, it matters how people talk about you. And the only way that you can ensure that when they take your deal before the credit committee, they holistically speak about you and they humanize you, versus just appearing as someone foreign to the institution and a risk, is by establishing a relationship. And how would I say do that? Like Nikki said, reach out to us, but also make sure that you're going to the events and taking advantage of the opportunities where you can actually get to know folks. So I'm dialing in from a conference in Atlanta hosted by the Real Estate Executive Council. And, it's organizations like that and Urban Land Institute's different events in person, where you're meeting not just folks that are fellow developers, but lenders, equity, capital markets folks, brokers, and you're able to kind of continue to see each other and establish a relationship and an awareness of what you're trying to achieve.
And Julia, you bringing up a good point. We are opening up. So conferences are back, people were in it, and I used to consider myself a great networker, but you got to get that rhythm back of just being comfortable with being in front of people and, kind of sharing your story and the things that you are looking to promote. So we're back, things are opening. Nikki, what were you going to share?
One question Julia mentioned about commercial space, and even bringing it back to you and what developers should be looking for or looking at. And it all boils down to what you mentioned earlier, the people. I think, commercial spaces and how we're using them is changing in different communities. And now everything is about community space, you know, and being able to, like these 15-minute cities, you know, being able to have all the amenities within 15 minutes of where you live. And I think everything is centered around community and creating spaces for people to connect. And that's what I think a lot of developers, and as these cities and these new cities are being built, people are at the center of it. And this concept of community and being able to connect with like-minded people is at the forefront.
Well, thank you for that. And I think this is a great way to wrap some things up, because we've all said it's about the people. And however we looked at development prior to COVID 2019, 2020, it has changed and the needs of people have changed. So we as developers and practitioners do have to be open to, there has to be a different way to address a problem that has been around for a while, but is now needing to be addressed differently. So we're hoping that we put some thought into, you know, some solutions that we need to solve for, and that it's opening up your mind of how you can address projects differently. And if you are interested in the ownership conversation, then now you have some great folks that can help guide you through that process. So in closing, I want to remind everyone to be sure to register for the June 9th Housing Summit that's going to be put on by ULI. We appreciate you taking your lunch hour and hearing from us. And as always, anytime that RNHS has a platform to talk about home ownership, we are so appreciative, and we're glad that ownership is starting to be a part of the housing conversation. So with that, I want to say thank you again for your time. I want to thank Nikki, Julia, and Howard. And I have to say it's all about who you know, not what you know, because most of, if not all of my success at RNHS is being connected to great people like these. So thank you for your time. Natalie, anything you want to say before we close out?
Oh, that's it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.